I sat at my corner desk, the city lights outside my window reflecting off the polished glass like tiny reminders of all the choices I'd made. My silk blouse felt impossibly smooth against my skin, but even that couldn't erase the tight knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed, vibrating insistently across the mahogany surface. I knew exactly who it was before I even picked it up. My mother's name flashed in bold letters. The message read, "Hannah, your father and I want to talk. About your salary, remember? 80% for your brother, 20% for us. That's it." I let out a slow breath, closing my eyes for a moment. After all these years, I still felt that familiar sting, the mix of disbelief and hurt, the quiet ache of being undervalued. I ran my fingers across the smooth edge of my desk, feeling the cool metal under my touch, and smiled, ironically, almost bitterly. I remembered the little voice inside me, the one that whispered, "You are more than what they say you are." And now, sitting here in my own space, surrounded by evidence of the life I built alone, I realized she was right. I wasn't going back to the old rules. I tapped a quick reply, fingers trembling just slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of knowing that this time, the power was mine. I remember the day like it was yesterday, though it was years ago. I was 22, fresh out of college, clutching my first paycheck, my heart swelling with pride. I had dreamt of independence, of proving I could stand on my own, but walking into that living room felt like stepping into a battlefield. My parents sat rigid on the faded couch, my younger brother sprawled on the armchair, completely unaware of the storm brewing. My father cleared his throat. "Hannah, we need to discuss how your salary will be split." I blinked, trying to make sense of the words. "Split?" I asked, my voice tight. "I worked hard for this. This is my first real job, my money." My mother's eyes narrowed. "We are your family. We helped you in college. Your brother will get 80% and the rest, 20% for us. That's it." The room seemed to shrink around me. I felt a lump in my throat, my hands trembling as if my own skin refused to cooperate with my rage. I wanted to scream, to cry, to run, maybe all three at once. But I didn't. I swallowed the hurt and forced a tight smile. Then I felt it, a small, worn leather bracelet on my wrist, a gift from my grandmother when I graduated. She had said, "Remember, Hannah, nobody can define your worth but you. Hold on to that, even if everyone else forgets." I gripped it, letting the soft leather anchor me. That night, I packed a small bag. I left behind the suffocating rules, the whispered expectations, and even the guilt my family tried to wrap around me like chains. I didn't know what the future held, only that I had to step into it alone. I remember looking at the skyline one last time before my car pulled away, feeling both terrified and strangely liberated. The world outside was enormous, full of possibility, and for the first time, I believed I could carve a path that was entirely my own. I moved to a small apartment downtown, the kind with peeling paint on the walls and a view of the back alley that no one would envy. But to me, it felt like freedom. I unpacked my modest suitcase, the leather bracelet from my grandmother still snug on my wrist, and whispered, "This is just the beginning." I found a job at a local marketing firm, starting from the bottom, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries. But every late night spent poring over campaigns, drafting proposals, and learning the ropes was a victory. Each tiny win reminded me that I was building something entirely my own. Then I met Mrs. Lydia Harrington, a seasoned executive with a reputation for spotting raw talent. She noticed me during a chaotic client presentation when my hands shook slightly, but my words landed perfectly. "You have potential, Hannah," she said, her voice both kind and firm. "I can help you grow, but you have to commit fully. No excuses." I did. There were nights I cried quietly in my apartment, overwhelmed by self-doubt and exhaustion. I questioned whether I was cut out for this life, whether leaving my family had been a mistake. But then I would touch the leather bracelet on my wrist and remember my grandmother's words. Step by step, I pushed forward. My first big client came 6 months later. The contract was modest, but it felt monumental. I celebrated alone, pouring coffee into my favorite mug and toasting silently to my own resilience. Then came the first profitable sale I made independently, the first email from a satisfied client that made my chest swell with pride. Each milestone, no matter how small, was a step toward proving to myself that I was capable, that I didn't need anyone else's approval. I became careful about what I shared with my family. Occasional social media posts hinted at progress, new office chair, small celebration, but nothing that revealed the full extent of my achievements. I wanted them to underestimate me. I wanted the eventual reveal to carry weight. I also invested in myself, attending seminars, learning advanced marketing techniques, and slowly building a client base that trusted my instincts. By the time I turned 26, I had a modest but growing consultancy, enough to rent a corner office with sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, a place where my creativity and discipline could flourish. And all the while, I kept my grandmother's bracelet visible on my desk, a quiet reminder of why I started, of the resilience that had carried me through every doubt, every rejection, and every lonely night. I had taken the past, the bitterness, the unfair expectations, and transformed it into fuel. I was no longer the hesitant, unsure girl who had left home years ago. I was Hannah Blake, fully in command of my life, quietly powerful, and ready for whatever came next. It happened one Thursday afternoon. I was in my corner office, the sunlight spilling over the sleek mahogany desk, when my assistant knocked lightly. "Your parents are here," she said. Her tone was polite but carried the weight of caution, as if she, too, sensed the storm about to enter. I took a slow breath, smoothing my skirt, straightening my blazer, and touched the leather bracelet on my wrist. My grandmother's words whispered in my mind, "Nobody can define your worth but you." The elevator doors opened, and in they walked, my mother, father, and younger brother. They looked around, eyes widening as they took in the space. The office was bright and airy, filled with tasteful modern art, a wall of neatly arranged awards, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the skyline. My desk bore an organized stack of client contracts, a laptop glowing with live analytics, and a coffee mug that read, "Built my own way." They froze, and I let them. I didn't rush to speak. I wanted them to feel the weight of the woman they had once tried to control. Finally, my mother's voice broke the silence. "Hannah, I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Let me explain," I said, my voice calm but carrying the authority I had fought so hard to earn. I detailed my journey. The apartment, the long nights, the first client, the consultancy I had built from scratch. I explained how I had refused to hand over my hard-earned salary, how I had claimed my own independence rather than succumb to their demands. I showed them a few financial reports, not every number, just enough to illustrate that I wasn't struggling. I was thriving. My father's jaw went rigid. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My brother stared at me as if I had become a completely different person overnight. They had expected a timid, struggling 20-something, and instead, they found a confident, accomplished woman who had turned rejection into fuel. "I didn't come here to punish you," I continued. "I came here to show you what happens when someone finally believes in herself and acts on it." My voice softened slightly, and I looked at each of them in turn. This is my life. My rules, my earnings, and my respect for myself is not up for negotiation. My brother finally found his voice, almost whispered. "Hannah, I didn't know. You didn't see," I said gently yet firmly, "because you weren't supposed to. I wasn't showing you for approval. I was showing you to be true to myself. And now, you get a choice. You can try to understand, or you can continue living in the past." The silence that followed was heavy, but different from the tension I remembered as a child. It carried awe, a hint of shame, and, subtly, hope. For the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. I wasn't the powerless girl they had dictated terms to. I was Hannah Blake, and I had created a world where I dictated the terms. I watched their faces carefully, reading every flicker of emotion, shock, disbelief, a trace of guilt, but also, slowly, curiosity. I knew I had the upper hand now. This wasn't about revenge. It was about establishing boundaries and offering a chance for change. "I'm willing to help," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "But things are going to be different. The old rules don't apply anymore." My mother looked puzzled. "Different how?" she asked cautiously. I leaned forward slightly, letting the weight of my words sink in. "If you want to be a part of my life, or even my success, you will need to respect it. That means no more demands about my money, no more comparisons with my brother, and no assumptions about my choices." My father's throat tightened. "And your brother?" I smiled faintly, letting the warmth of my tone contrast with the firmness in my eyes. "He will be treated fairly, just as anyone else deserves. But he will no longer have entitlement over what I earn. He, like you, has to earn respect through his actions, not assumptions." I paused, letting them absorb that. Then I added, "Each of you has conditions too, things you must work on for yourselves and for our family to move forward. Mother, you need to release control and allow people to make their own mistakes. Father, you need to acknowledge when you've been wrong and learn to apologize without defensiveness. And my brother, you need to stop measuring your success against mine and instead discover your own path." I looked at them steadily, feeling a strange mix of power and relief. "I care about all of you, but I'm not going to bend back into old patterns. I've spent too many years trying to be acceptable, to earn love and approval. That ends now. If you're willing to change, I'll support you, but only on these terms." My grandmother's bracelet pressed against my wrist, a quiet reminder of the strength that had carried me here. I could feel her presence in my words, in my stance, and in the calm authority radiating from me. They shifted uncomfortably, but I saw the first signs of understanding. My mother's eyes softened, my father's shoulders slumped slightly, and even my brother looked thoughtful, as if he were beginning to grasp the consequences of his past assumptions. I let the silence stretch, letting them reflect on their choices. This wasn't punishment. It was accountability and a chance to grow alongside me. I realized that real power wasn't about controlling others. It was about setting boundaries, demanding respect, and guiding people toward their own potential, all while remaining true to yourself. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I had reclaimed my life, my money, my respect, and my family's chance for redemption, but on my terms. Weeks passed after the confrontation, and slowly, subtly, things began to change. My mother stopped checking my accounts and instead started asking me about my projects, genuinely curious. My father began listening rather than lecturing, and even my brother took on a small freelance project of his own, proud of earning something independently. I watched these changes quietly, without boasting or reminding them of the past. I let them discover the lessons themselves. The shift in energy at family dinners, the small smiles exchanged, and the absence of tension were all signs that they were learning, slowly but truly. And me? I reflected often on the journey I had taken. I thought about the girl who had left home years ago, trembling and uncertain, clutching a small suitcase and a leather bracelet. I thought about every late night, every doubt, every victory small and large that had brought me here. I realized that my independence was more than financial. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply personal. One evening, I placed my grandmother's bracelet on my desk, now worn and soft from years of touch. It was no longer just a reminder of strength. It was a symbol of transformation. I had taken the pain, the rejection, and the unfair expectations and turned them into a life I could be proud of. Looking out the window at the city lights, I felt a sense of calm and triumph unlike anything I had experienced before. I understood, finally, that empowerment wasn't about keeping score or proving anyone wrong. It was about living authentically, setting boundaries, and nurturing growth, both in myself and, when possible, in others. I smiled softly and whispered, almost to myself, "I chose me. I built me. And no one, not even the people who tried to define me, can take that away." The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city below. But in that quiet, I heard the strongest sound of all, my own voice, steady and confident, echoing through the life I had earned and the woman I had become.